once again. Thank you all for joining us. This is Nuance. We'll be speaking about Mayor Adams offering money out of his own pocket for information leading to the arrest of a World War I memorial vandal. I'm Mike Scala, joined as always by Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip hop artist and chair of BLM Tokyo. What's going on, Jay?
Just having my pre-breakfast. Um, it's not the real breakfast yet, but had to get something in since we're getting started now.
Okay. So do you have a pre-breakfast every day?
I do not, but um, I didn't get out of bed before, in advance enough to make breakfast before we jumped on camera.
Right.
So and to get a little something I guess, snack on. So it's a pre-breakfast.
Okay. I saw something on Reddit recently. This woman said that she was on a diet trying to lose weight. And so she said she only tried to eat between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. every day. And she was describing
Mm,
the whole day. It was making me hungry reading the post because she has, I guess, a nice breakfast in the morning. But then she's like, then I clean the house and I take care of the kids. I do some babysitting. I make food for my husband when he comes home for dinner. And she had this whole routine. And she's not eating at all until 8 o'clock the next morning. It's devotion. I don't know if I could do that, but I guess people do that kind of thing when they fast, right? So it's not unheard of. But it did seem
right.
wild to me that that was her diet, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. And then for the rest of the day, I eat nothing.
Yeah. I wonder what she had from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. to sustain her all day.
Right, right,
Although that you know what, it's depending on what she ate, it's not inconceivable. Like you said, people fast. I've done 3-day water fasts before. Um, the other day I made I don't know, remember what it was, but it was a big bowl of something, and it was just a lot. And
it's a big bowl.
yeah, it was a lot of. I think it was a lot of beans and tofu and bread, and it was just a bunch of stuff. And then so I just wasn't hungry for the rest of the day. I didn't eat until the next day. It was just that off of that one meal.
Right. And I guess the idea behind that is they say when you sleep, you're less active, right? So if you eat late, just kind of
Right.
sits in your stomach, you don't digest it as much. And so I'm assuming that's her theory here, right? She eats in the morning, so she has the whole day to work off the fat, calories, whatever, and that's a way to lose weight.
It's also, I mean, they say standard we should be uh eating 2,000 to 2,500 calories a day. So if you're eating less than that, you'll be in a calorie deficit, so you're going to lose weight. So she's probably trying to do that.
Right. But the timing of it, right? I'm assuming that's why she doesn't have a big dinner. She has a big breakfast. So she's not just
Yeah.
sleeping with the,
Right. That would also help.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. When I went to a personal trainer, one of the first things that she had me do was make a list of my typical diet day by day for that
Mm,
purpose of seeing how many calories I generally consume. And I had to think about it because, I wasn't really mindful of my dietary habits at the time. I just
right.
I was doing. And so I had to think about it and kind of write down my typical day, what I might eat, kind of average it out. And she looked at it. She was like, okay, you're basically perfectly on point. I think it's like exactly 2,000 calories. So you're fine. And so then instead of focusing, I guess, on the diet, because it wasn't about losing weight per se, it was about getting more muscular. So, keep that up. You're not going to get fat by doing that. But in fact, I actually lost weight because I was exercising a lot more, but eating the same. And so
Right.
I didn't lose fat, but I was able to gain some muscle. Obviously, if you wanted to put on a lot of bulk, you have to eat even more.
Right. And up the protein,
Yeah.
which protein helps you feel full longer. So I think like the other day the that bowl of food that I had, I was kind of measuring it out just to see, and I think it was like 45 grams of protein for that, which for one meal I think is quite high. And so I just wasn't hungry for the rest of the day after that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. If you're not hungry, then you don't eat. I think sometimes we overeat because it's just
We do.
habit or we think we're supposed to, right? Or, we make
Yeah.
ourselves a plate of food. We don't want to waste the food. Where people say, don't be wasteful. But
All right.
we can overeat, right? I mean, what if one piece of meat or whatever fills you up? You don't got to force the second one down.
Right.
So,
Yeah. So,
Well, eating is important, exercise is important, so is sleep. And in fact, last night I lost sleep because, of all things, I started watching Nuance videos. And I was like, man, these are really good. Obviously, I'm biased, but I was entertained because I was watching some of the old ones, right? We've been doing this for a while now. So I was going
right.
back a year, almost 2 years, and they were almost like new shows to me because they're so long ago. And I was watching them and I got into them. I'm like, wow, these are really entertaining discussions. What am I going to say next? Right? But you know, it's actually kind of cool. What's kind of cool, there's a playlist on there for all the polls, and I think there's 80 something of them now. And so I just let it play. It was actually kind of funny to watch me ask like 86 questions or whatever in a row. Like, do you believe? Do you believe? Do you agree? Do you agree? It's like over and over and over again on all different subjects related to New York issues, national issues, local things, all variety of stuff. It was kind of cool.
Right. That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah, and those clips are really good. I was going back and watching, for example, the discussion on speed cameras with Adam Clayton Powell. That was really cool. We talked about the Independence Party versus independent voters with Sal
Right.
Albanese. And we have some really good guests and some good topics. And those short clips, I think, are really good to have up there. If you don't want to sit through an entire episode just to watch those clips, those abortion decision conversations we had, right? The Supreme Court
Yeah.
overturned Roe v. Wade. I think those were really good and informative too.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a lot of content to make those clips. Just yeah, definitely need to get up more. We've got so much that we can pull from.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, speaking of polls, we did have two poll questions that we
We
put.
did.
Get to those.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get to the poll question. So the one from 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the protests, and actually they're both kind of related to the protests. So this one was, do you fear the Israeli-Palestinian protest messages are being lost amidst extremist voices? And so we had 73% said yes, and 27% said no on this poll here.
So the extremist voices are drowning out legitimate messages that might be going.
A lot of people are feeling that, or in regards, but I guess it's going to be clarified. So we said just we didn't say whether it was pro-Palestinian or pro-Israel. It was just, are any of these messages you feel getting distorted? Um, so one person clarified their answer saying that if you mean the pro-Palestinian protests, no. There are many factors that contribute to what obscures what we hear to some degree, but important questions revolve around taking a realistic assessment of the ways those protests are covered. So saying the information is highly distorted, um, so I guess they don't think so. They think there's being some pretty good coverage here. That's a pretty lengthy answer that they wrote here, but yeah.
Okay.
Someone else said that I think the messages are being deliberately lost by the corporate media, lost in quotes, and of course, right-wing media who persist in misidentifying the reasons for the protests. The majority of protesters are not pro-Palestinian nor anti-Semitic, they're anti-genocide. And it appears the police are being a lot more violent than the people they're arresting, just like in the Occupy movement.
Yeah, I think there are parallels to that as we touched on last week.
Right. Yeah.
But that's also one where messages did get lost pretty quickly.
Yeah. People, the loudest voices start to get focused on, and you never know
Yeah.
who's gonna be that loud voice.
Free the
And
attention, right?
yeah, someone even pointed that out, saying media will go for the loudest and biggest controversy. MAGA will amplify that. You didn't see interviews when the encampment started. It was
Right.
only after the tensions arose, then MAGA flooded the zone. The original group was pro-Palestinian pro-Palestine and Jewish students, their voices got lost.
Well, here's something that's interesting because we always talk about how the most extreme voices get echoed, right? And we say, the algorithm plays into that and all those different factors. I think one thing we don't point out enough is that, to this commenter's point, people who oppose the legitimate message on anything, any issue, any topic, will themselves highlight the most extreme and ridiculous sounding voices on that side to paint the entire message and paint everyone who supports that message like that.
Mm.
And so it isn't only a matter of, well, these extremists find themselves and echo their own voices on Twitter or whatever. It's also a matter of people who disagree with the legitimate protests, let's say,
Right.
echoing them intentionally to try to make the whole protest look negative.
Right, right. I think that's definitely a nuanced approach that's, outside of that binary of, yeah, are they, is it this or is it that? And this comment here was another one in kind of in that same vein. And they put this extremism is a slippery word, much like terrorism is a word applied by one side in a conflict, military or political, to delegitimize or dehumanize the other side. Like terrorism, extremism has a sliding scale and can mean whatever authority wants it to mean. Throughout the citadels of institutional U.S. media and the halls of power in Washington, these student protesters qualify as extremists simply by virtue of protesting against Israel. Um, so, and I think that's a fair point as well, especially when we're seeing the things like that bill that either was just proposed or passed in one of the houses that made it. I'm sorry?
You're talking about the anti-Semitism monitor on campuses?
The one that would make it illegal to criticize Israel.
That's so
They
Who passed that? I never even heard of that. Who passed that? You mentioned
well,
something.
they're extending them. No, this was at the federal level. There was a trying to extend or redefine what would classify as anti-Semitism, and it comes down to basically criticizing Israel. I'll have to.
Send that
It
to
has
me,
a
because here's the thing. Even if we're going to classify something as hate speech, that in itself doesn't mean you can't say it. That's still protected by the First Amendment. So even if you want to call something anti-Semitism, you can't have a law saying you can't say something that's anti-Semitic, or you can't say something that's Islamophobic or racist or whatever. You have a right to say all these nasty things in the U.S. Other countries aren't the same. The U.S., we have the First Amendment right. Hate speech is covered,
yeah,
but there's a fine line sometimes between what's a hate speech and a hate crime. I mean, if you're beating someone up while saying these hateful things, well,
right.
that elevates the level of criminality. It becomes a hate crime. But just the words themselves are constitutionally protected if they're not accompanied by criminal acts.
Right. According to reports that's been this what is it? The Anti-Semitism Awareness Act
Mm-hmm.
is saying it would make it illegal to criticize Israel on campus.
Make it illegal to criticize. Send me the actual text of the bill, not what someone is saying about it, because that doesn't
Right,
sound.
right. It's been news reports. I'll have to find the actual bill. Um, where is it at? It's passed the U.S. House of Representatives, 320 to 91.
The bill number or anything. Let's pull this up and take a look at it.
I'm looking for that here. It was actually there was a Republican representative who commented saying, let's see. He's saying that he thinks this is a poorly conceived, unconstitutional bill and that he's going to vote no on it. Basically, of talking about things and applying this double standard to Israel.
All right, HR 6090. See, the ACLU came out against it.
Yeah.
What's the actual bill? So we know what's going on here. Not what the media or biases are saying about it. So this is okay. Representative Lawler, he's also the sponsor, along with Richie Torres, of that anti-Semite monitor bill on campuses, where where they want to report instances of anti-Semitism.
Mm.
Let's see. Here's a summary of the bill, actually on Congress's website. This bill provides statutory authority for the requirement that the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights take into consideration the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism when reviewing or investigating complaints of discrimination based on race, color, or national origin in programs or activities that receive federal financial assistance. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. So we have to see now
What their definition is, and that's what some people are having an issue with, is their definition of anti-Semitism is quite broad.
Okay, maybe so. We'll get to that in a second. But from what I'm seeing already, this doesn't make it a crime to criticize Israel. They're talking about discrimination based on race, color, or national origin. So they're probably trying to expand the scope of what's considered discrimination, but it might be something like stopping someone from being in a club on campus, something like that.
Mm.
Let's see if we get to the text.
Well, in their working definition of that Holocaust Remembrance Museum, they're saying as far as manifestations of anti-Semitism might include the targeting of the state of Israel conceived as a Jewish collectivity. However, criticism of Israel similar to that leveled against any other country cannot be regarded as anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism frequently charges Jews with conspiracy to harm humanity, and it is often used to blame Jews for why things go wrong. It's expressed in speech, writing, visual forms, action, employs sinister stereotypes and negative traits.
Yeah, I'm in the bill right now. There's a lot of background actually written into the bill. They're saying that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin in programs and activities receiving federal financial assistance. So keep that in mind, right? This wouldn't apply to just some student on campus making a statement, in class or whatever. You're under arrest. Like, that's not what this is. They're talking about discrimination on the basis of, right? Specifically programs and activities. So that's how it starts off. They're talking about, let's see, such title does not cover discrimination based solely on religion, but individuals who face discrimination based on actual or perceived shared ancestry or ethnic characteristics do not lose protection under such title. So actually, it seems like it's funny. They're writing these clauses into the language of the bill that seem to be there for the purpose of withstanding scrutiny if they're sued on a First Amendment claim. They're like, before they even get into what they're doing, they're justifying why they're doing it in the actual language of the bill. So that's interesting.
So in this working definition, there's a section here talking about contemporary examples of anti-Semitism in public life, media, schools, and workplace.
Yep, they're saying that right now. I'm right there with you. When it gets to definitions, it says it includes contemporary examples of anti-Semitism identified in the IHRA definition.
Right, and some of those definitions, there's a list here about, looks like maybe about 10, 15 of them, but a couple of them, one says drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. Another one, holding Jews collectively responsible for actions of the state of Israel.
Holding Jews responsible. So again, you're not talking about the Israeli government now, right? You're talking about people of Jewish descent, holding them responsible for what their government is doing in Israel.
Right.
Yeah.
But also making, they're pointing out specifically drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis.
That may go far. I understand why that's in there, why there might be a tendency, but from a legal perspective, from a constitutional perspective, the question is that discriminating against someone on the basis of their...
But is that enforceable? How can that be enforceable? I mean, to say people can't say that this government is acting in a way that the Nazis were acting?
Again, it's not just saying that, it's keeping someone from programs or activities, right? So, for example, let's say a Jewish student wants to join your club on campus to say, well, you can't come in here because your government is acting like the Nazis. That would kind of what that would happen.
Right. But just saying it shouldn't be a thing.
It's not.
But I think with...
Yeah. I think there's a concern that this may go far in its application. However,
That's what
it
that.
doesn't. It do, I mean, we also need to be clear that it doesn't criminalize being critical of Israel, right?
Well,
It
here's the thing.
ties some of those critiques to discrimination if done that way, right? If you're doing it to try to keep someone from a program or activity on campus.
Well, here's the thing that in that definition from that Holocaust Remembrance Museum, um, they do go in to say anti-Semitic acts are criminal when they are when they are so defined by law. For example, denial of the Holocaust or distribution of anti-Semitic materials.
Wait, what?
That's that. This is in their definition here.
But
So
not
apparently,
under U.S. law. This is an international body, right? I mean, because it is, for example, certainly in Germany, you can get in trouble for that. Uh,
right, right,
in England, right? Even in England, they don't have free speech. In the
right.
U.S., you can't put someone in jail for denying the Holocaust.
Well, that's I think what some people's concern are is in that bill, it cites the definitions used in this recognized by this body. And so that kind of
Right.
implies that this would or at least that they're attempting to make this codified into to law in the states, which could may or may not be the intent, but some people have raised that this opens the door to the potential that
Well,
this definition will go a little too far.
the last clause of this bill says nothing in this act shall be construed to diminish or infringe upon any right protected under the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And so they are careful in their language here to tie it to
Right,
acts of discrimination in
right.
programs and activities that receive federal funding.
So
And so
that would seem to nullify some of
some of right.
these what
With
people are
that
concerned with.
sure. With that said, I think there is still a valid critique that it may
Yeah,
go too far.
right. Absolutely, absolutely. So, um, I forgot how we completely got here, but
Hey, I mean, again, messages getting lost, right? Like,
right,
perfect example. I'm sure you're seeing people intentionally distorting these messages for the sake of making their point.
right. Well, it was there's people raising their flag on how broad this bill is being written and what the potential is. Even that one representative raised the flag that this could has the potential to go too far
Mm.
in its application. So yeah, so
All right, so we had another poll on the same topic, right?
yes, we did. Oh, we were talking about extremism and
Yeah.
whatnot. That's how I got there on that. Um, so oh yes, because the last see we're bringing it back. The last sentence from that person's comment was that these student protesters qualify as quote extremists simply by virtue of protesting against Israel. So and not it's kind of related in that way because some people do see them in that light because of that. So let's get to the second poll. Our second poll was also centered around this conflict, what's happening, and more specifically, what's happening at Columbia University. And so our question here was, should the students occupying Hamilton Hall at Columbia University be expelled? So this was uh, a threat raised by the university that the students could potentially face expulsion. Even the mayor had said that, well, not as far as expulsion, but telling them they need to leave. So we had 56% said yes, they should be expelled.
Wow.
44% said no. And keep in mind, this is a liberal, it's
Right.
kind of a
Also,
slants liberal.
well, from hearing some of those comments, it seems to clash a little bit with the prior poll, although numerically, both polls, I guess, were aligned in that sense, right? Because even the other one said that the real messages are being lost in this.
Right. Some people, yeah, they thought, I think the
Majority,
majority of people,
right? Yeah.
yeah. Right.
So the majority of people are saying, even on mostly a liberal side here, that the legitimate messages are being lost in the protests, co-opted by extremist voices, and students who are occupying the hall should be expelled.
Yeah. Yeah. So one person said they should because a person can protest something without being a total jackass and putting others at risk.
Yeah, and you
Um,
know what? There was a question last week about was there any damage done to the property, and it was still very early on when we were talking about it last week. It seems like there actually was, right? And Mayor Adams, I think even President Biden made that point that you can't call it a peaceful protest when you're actually damaging property.
yeah, I mean, I wonder, I don't know the extent of the damage that they were doing and if people were at risk,
Right. And it wasn't like
but
burning down the whole building or anything. So,
right,
again, it could be, and it probably was, the overwhelming majority of them not intending to do physical damage, but if some
right.
people do, right, that gets put on everyone else.
Another person put a comment, I voted no because it is the privilege of the young to be stupid and ours to be merciful.
Okay. Stupid privilege, huh? The thing is this, though, they're inserting themselves in the arena in a sense. So yes, I am sympathetic with this idea that listen, it's college, it's a place to explore and become passionate about something, right? Find yourself, get involved in a
Right,
cause, step into democracy for the first time, all that. Yeah, certainly.
right.
Right. But you're also now participating in this hostile takeover of a hall on campus and purposely breaking rules and breaking law, but saying we don't want any consequences on us. Like, how could you have that both ways?
Well, yeah, I mean, expulsion is it would seem, I can understand, if you're trespassing and they get the arrest for the trespass, that type of situation or whatever it is. Um, the expulsion from school could be, I don't know, some of it seems a little too far, but
And
again, I guess it depends.
but here's the thing: people get expelled for much less, though, right? I mean, they get expelled for not breaking any laws. You can get expelled for plagiarizing a paper.
That's true. That's very true.
So
I'm
now
just
you're
thinking
talking
like
about
if you
committing
put
crimes.
expulsion, if you put expulsion up there,
Yeah.
then it's almost would seem to stand as a deterrent for any sort of protest.
Okay, but again, okay, so we need nuance here because even Sheba was saying
Right,
last week is how protest isn't allowed, but you can't draw it with this broad brush like any protest is going to be illegal. Obviously, we have a First Amendment right. We have a right to
right.
protest. That's at the cornerstone of democracy and what free speech is all about. But it doesn't mean that you can do it in any way that you wish, even if it breaks
True,
other laws, right? You know,
true.
and some people will say, well, I think you made this point last week also. The truly peaceful protest and the protests that aren't disruptive in any way don't get people's attention because they just go about their lives and ignore it. And so when people are sufficiently frustrated, they feel they have to be more disruptive, right? Listen, you guys
Right,
are listening to us, so we're gonna throw ourselves and block off the building, block off the bridges, block off the roads. Now you have to listen to us because you got no choice, right? It's
right. I
like,
mean that kind of ties into the famous Dr. King quote, riots are the language of the unheard.
sure. So
Yeah,
that does happen, and that's part of our society. But that doesn't mean that it's lawful, right? Because
right,
now you have a clash. You have your First Amendment right to protest, sure, but you don't
right,
have a right to trespass. You don't have a right to,
right,
block streets and roads and disrupt the flow of traffic and so forth. So
right,
you're doing that knowing that that's illegal, and maybe you're saying it's justified because we feel so desperate we have to break laws to get our point across. Yeah,
right,
people sometimes feel that way, but that doesn't negate the fact that you're breaking laws and there are legal consequences for that.
right, right. Uh, Another person brought up, what's the historical practice? I know occupying a building usually leads to police clearing it. That's fairly normal, but what happened to the occupiers historically? So we've seen these types of things,
Yeah.
protests and not as extreme as this, but even things like sit-ins that
Right.
that used to happen a lot. So what happened? It's a good question. What happened to
I think
people in these
oftentimes
types of
people get arrested, and by the way,
get arrested? Yeah, but as
yeah,
far
you
as schools,
oh,
students, were
oh
there
students.
expulsions, that type of things? Yeah,
Yeah, well, I don't know, we can look back because Columbia has a history of this at that particular building. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
students expelled from Columbia for protesting the Vietnam War, right? Uh,
right.
that's worth looking into the numbers on how many were, right, if there were. But it's just one of those things. Even elected officials sometimes get themselves arrested on purpose, right? It's PR.
Yeah,
Talk about the
sure.
mayor potentially doing this as a PR stunt or what we think, but sometimes they'll do that, and make news, right? And it's the whole visual of I was so fed up, I protested this, and the police had to drag me out in handcuffs. Now I'm on the front page of the paper in handcuffs because I believe in this cause so much. Sometimes people will do that intentionally, but again, you can't have it both ways. You're choosing to break the law. You're choosing to cause us attention, right? You're choosing to make this scene about it. Well, now
Right.
you have an arrest record, but you can't say I'm going to do all this, but you can't touch me. Which is what some of them. I mean, that was like the third or the final demand of them, right? We're going to break these laws and break these rules, but we want complete amnesty for doing it.
Right. There was a, yeah. Um, so in there was a, let's see, there's a couple of of course opposing views here. I mean, this poll was kind of close. Where was this? Yeah,
Well,
so
numerically, did you
56%.
say was it 70 something percent?
56% yes, they should be expelled. 44% no, they shouldn't be.
Was pretty close.
Um, Someone said the students are no longer protesting and are engaging in what can generously be described as acts of civil disobedience. At minimum, they are breaking rules designed to promote student safety and access education. At worst, they are breaking the law.
Right.
At
Civil
frankly,
disobedience.
Columbia could expel students with little public blowback.
Yeah. Civil
Um,
disobedience often entails breaking the law. Right?
right, right. Um, So, yeah, one of the points was that, some of this, or people talk about that this creating threatening environments for some of the other students on campus. And so one of the comments here is, who exactly is feeling threatened and why? Is it like the heavily armed white cop feeling threatened by a perfectly law-abiding black man? Doesn't this characterization bear close examination? I mean, it's not paranoia if they really are out to get you. It's not anti-Semitism if it really is genocide. It's not disruptive behavior if there really are issues that urgently need to be reconsidered. And it's not free speech if the essential audience perversely turns a deaf ear to it.
It's not free speech if the audience doesn't listen to it.
Yeah, I didn't get that one, that one there.
Again,
Oh,
it sounds like an entitled attitude to me. Not everyone's going to listen to you, but you have a right to talk all you want. And here's the thing: we shouldn't be minimizing the legitimate fear and concern that Jewish students have on these campuses, right? And these protesters aren't all Palestinian or Muslim. There's a lot of Jewish people protesting with them, but
sure,
nonetheless,
sure.
people who are outside that protest, they are feeling threatened, and rightfully so. And aside from that, what about the person who spends $100,000 to go to Columbia, you know, completes the curriculum, qualifies for the degree, and now they can't go to their graduation because it was canceled due to this protesting? I mean,
Right. That's another thing we saw that they went ahead and canceled the main activity of the
commencement ceremony, or whatever you
ceremony.
call it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
is that fair? Is that right? Are you not depriving that student?
Yeah. So, um, interesting back and forth. And again, this was a little bit like we noted, this is a site that does slant more to the liberal side, and so to see that people are more in favor of them getting expelled is kind of interesting.
Mhm.
And one person called that out here, said, "I can't believe the vote here. They would have rooted for black students to receive 20-year sentences in Birmingham in 1963." But they will please the Republicans who have attacked Columbia and its pathetic president, whose only concern is for rich donors like Robert Kraft. So,
On that,
very
I
interesting.
think is a partisan issue. I don't think everything should be looked at as is this a Republican or a Democratic issue? Is it a conservative
Mm,
or progressive issue? I mean, there is nuance to these things. That's why we do this whole show. And I think we need to move
right.
away from that because people have a tendency to first put it in one of those neat partisan boxes and then come to a conclusion based on the box they put it in instead of trying to look at it objectively.
Right. Um, I'm looking at this one last comment here. Meh, another protest journal, blah. I guess I'm sure this has been written about extensively. And so,
Okay. Well, yeah, and you know what? That's a fair point to make because Andre Bystroff, the political consultant, was on here last week, and he was saying that the media loves covering this, and they'll cover the protest, they'll cover a politician's response to it, then they'll cover the response to the response to it, the protest to the response to the response to it, and it just goes on and on and on and on.
right,
And it's the top story all day and on all the news channels and sites, but the voters don't seem to care about it to that degree. I mean, it's being overplayed, right? I think he said amongst young people, it's like number 15 on the list.
right,
So is it a distraction, right? And we spent time just now talking about students being expelled. There were reports that up to half the protesters, I believe, weren't even students. They were just outside
mm,
agitators. And
mm,
so I think messages certainly are being distorted here, right? If we're looking at it as, oh, these are Columbia students peacefully exercising their First Amendment right. What if it is something more devious happening, right? I mean, what if it
right.
being
And
orchestrated by these agitators who are trying to distract us from the real issues?
right,
I think
and
this is not a
those.
legitimate issue, but like we said, again, this is all you see, the protest stuff, all you see constantly, and then we don't spend time on the other things that are affecting us more directly at home.
And we do need to take that into consideration that outside agitators could play a part. And we've seen that in every sort of protest or demonstration or movement. That's been the case. That was the case during the some of the Black Lives Matter marches and demonstrations, during the Occupy Wall Street ones, during some of the Roe v. Wade demonstrations that were happening. We've seen that people will come in to just to cause chaos or to provoke a certain sort of response to so that they can change the narrative that's happening there.
To what extent is China and TikTok responsible, right? Because you see young people apparently are being bombarded with these messages on TikTok constantly, constantly, constantly. These graphic images. We're gonna get to Mayor Adams on Drink Champs, and my Islam made his point. Well, he's not making that point, but he is saying that he keeps seeing these images, and I was thinking maybe he's spending too much time on TikTok because I don't see these images, but he's like that's all he
What
sees
images?
online. Graphic visuals of Palestinian children being killed and things like that.
Yeah. 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 I've seen a lot of those. Or not them being killed. I think earlier there was probably a little bit more. These days, not so much.
Okay.
But yeah, you would see that on TikTok.
Because he's saying that that's why the kids are protesting. They're tired of seeing these babies being blown up and killed, and that's all they're seeing on social media. These violent, graphic images of them being hit with bombs and things like that. Like, wow, is that being done intentionally? Is that being shown to these kids by China controlling TikTok for the purpose of sowing division and chaos in the U.S.?
I mean, that's a good question. Or it could also be what I'm seeing a lot of, and then again, people also need to understand how the algorithms work. I see a lot of pro-Palestinian content, but that's probably because I've interacted with some of it, and
Mm,
so it's going to show me more of it. So there could be a ton of pro-Israeli content that I'm not seeing because the algorithm says, "Hey, you're not interested in this," or "Hey,
right.
I think you're interested in this, I think," or the people around you, because also you get served content not only from what you interact with, but from people that you are on friends lists with, what they interact with, the algorithm's gonna be like, oh, well, you guys are friends, so you might like what they like. So here, I'm gonna show you this.
Yeah.
So
So you can make the
that,
financial argument about, okay, well, they're just showing you what you like because they want you to spend more time on the app and
absolutely,
it's them. But there's
yeah,
also, I think, the more cynical view here, and I don't know to what extent this has been proven, but I think it's worth exploring the extent to which this is being done intentionally to divide us. So, oh, you engage with this content, let's show you more of it, more of it, more of it. Like, let's get you thinking about nothing but that. And then someone else, maybe they're on the other side of it, well, let's show them a ton of videos on the other side because now both of you are supercharged with these images constantly, and now you can go at it, and now we're all fighting each other in the US.
right. And you're making more content, and you're on the app longer. But
Right.
I don't think it would have been that the algorithm was made specifically to, um, for this conflict, so to speak. It's just
Oh,
that
yeah.
this discussion or this opposition does suit an algorithmic type of system very well because it bolsters up your opinion and tries to reaffirm things that you might believe in or want to believe in. And so then, you know, people end up with an arsenal, if you will, of stuff to talk about and complain about or whatever. And then, you know, now you've got more people staying on the app and talking at each other.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't think the algorithm was created for this conflict, but I'm wondering if
Right.
there was an intentional effort at some point to leverage this conflict through the algorithm.
That is a possibility. If you know, some people have complained, and I've heard a lot of people say it, that a lot of certain messages are getting um buried in favor of others.
Mhm.
So anything criticizing Israel is getting buried in favor of messages that are supporting Israel. I don't know if I've
Yet they're
seen that, but
showing, but yet they're
I'm sorry.
showing all these Palestinian kids being bombed.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like I've seen some people complaining both ways, right? People that are pro-Israel are saying that there's too much content promoting Palestine, so it's anti-Semitic. They're trying to drown that out. People who are pro-Palestine are saying that their messages are getting buried in favor of this thing for Israel. I think some of that has to do with people just not understanding what the algorithms do, or you
Well,
know, just
I
or
think
there could be some actual truth
sure.
to it in a way.
I think some of it also is people not being satisfied with the number of views that they're getting, and so they think it's a conspiracy against them. I'm shadow banned. They don't want my messages out there when it just
There's that
it got
too.
going viral when they didn't want it to. Right?
Right, there's that too. And you know, maybe they're not getting the responses that they want because some people, you know, maybe they're just like, look, I'm gonna step out of this. It's very controversial. I don't want to, you know, if I hit like or if I put
Yeah.
a comment in, now people are gonna look at me in a
Right.
certain way. That could be a possibility. But there is legitimate reasons to be concerned with the potential for manipulation of the algorithm from the platform level. And we can see this in evidence by one of the recent updates. I say recent, I'm not putting a specific time, but there's an update that was in Instagram where the algorithm will automatically decide if a post is political content and pull it away from your feed unless you go into your settings and say, I'm okay with political content.
Wow.
So we know that the
Everything is
algorithm,
political, right? So, and again, that it goes back to the
right?
definition.
Who
How do you
decides? The
determine
algorithm decides.
what's right? But the algorithm doesn't decide. People have to program the algorithm to
Right,
analyze it a certain way, right? And I think it's privilege in that when you say we're not going to allow political content. What's political? Everything is political. And so even by not being political, you're being political by not engaging in politics directly. You know what I mean? Everything has a political element. So it's very privileged to say, well, we don't talk politics over here. I mean, but what does that mean? And then what ends up
right,
happening is if you express a minority, so-called minority viewpoint, or if you talk about the oppressed in any way, shape, or form, that gets brushed aside as political. You're being political. Like, no, I'm
right,
talking about my survival and my life and my job.
right,
Right. I'm not being political, right? That's why I say it takes a certain privilege to say we don't allow political discussion. All right, great.
right,
Everything's good with you, I guess. So you don't need to talk about anything.
right. And I think,
So if anything consequential is going to have a political angle to it.
right. I think in regards to what happened with that change on Instagram, I don't think a lot of people realized it. It just it that update happened and it was just turned on in people's profiles by default. So you have to go in there physically and change it. Like, no, I'm fine with political content.
Yeah, I mean, but again, how is that defined? Like,
The algorithm decides what it
right,
is.
how, right, but how is it programmed? For example, all of
Right.
my content, if I
Sure.
post up stories about what I'm doing in the community, are they going to say, oh, well, he's a political figure. We're not going to show that to anyone anymore?
Depending on what you're talking about. And I guess, and then, you know, they didn't say how the algorithm decides, or at least I never saw how the algorithm decides, but yeah.
I saw a great post. Someone made the comment. They said, and this actually could be a T-shirt. It said there are two races, white and political. There are two religions, Christian and political. there are two sexualities, straight and political, right? There are two genders, male and political, and it went on and on and on, cis and political, so forth and so forth. In other words, the default, right, the dominant one in society is considered not political to talk about. But if you identify with anything else that doesn't represent that, you get talked about as being too political. Like, oh, we're not talking about politics. Get that out of here, right?
Mhm.
So it's so easy to say, well, we're not going to be political if you check all these boxes of being in the dominant group of everything.
Yeah. So just to point that out in the and yeah, so here's that screen. Political content. They definitely define it in Instagram as political content is likely to mention governments, elections, or social topics that affect a group of people and or society at large. And you've got two options. Limit political content from people you don't follow, or don't limit political content from people you don't follow. And
Also,
so,
it's people
yeah.
that you don't follow, not from people that you do follow.
Right. And this affects suggestions in the Explore, Reels,
Gotcha.
your feed recommendations, and suggested users.
All
It
right.
doesn't
So
affect the content from accounts you do follow. And this
gotcha.
also applies to threads.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that makes a little bit of sense. However, look at those definitions. Look how broad they are. Anything that affects
Right.
anyone on any level. What the hell is that?
Right. And so to the point of the potential for the platform to manipulate what type of messages get through, we see that it's very possible. I mean, even though we knew it, but the fact that you can, in this case here, you can turn a switch to say, okay, I want less of that, and they decide what that is. There is the option, the possibility that someone could say, oh, I want to send more of that, and so that's a possibility out there. And that was one of the fears actually of the Congress and whatnot in regards to TikTok
Yeah. Yeah.
and such an audience influence over the attentions of people in the United States and
It's
having those ties to
right.
an opposition government.
Right. Think about that. That's
Yeah.
really a legitimate concern, right? So much of
Yeah.
our attention span, especially younger people, is dictated by these apps and these algorithms. And now, if you're
Right.
giving the algorithms to foreign powers that we are at odds with, think about the danger that poses for the US. That's a
Right.
grave national security threat, I think.
If they can, and we know that they can, direct the type of messages that are being shown, that now you've got a massive and powerful propaganda machine.
Yes.
And that's part of the fear that they were having. And remember, I think we did talk about this before, and I mentioned this before. People were talking about, oh, they're worried about the metadata and this and that. I think that's the lesser concern. I think the propaganda potential is
Right.
the more concern for,
It's
a
the
foreign
aggregate,
opposition government.
it's the aggregate data, right? So it's
Yeah,
not so much, oh, why they want to follow little Jimmy down the block. What does China care about when Jimmy go gets ice cream? It's not about
right,
that. It's not about little Jimmy.
right,
It's about
right,
Jimmy and the Timmy and the Scott, everyone else combined, right? We have this data, these stats now on how Americans are living their lives, what their habits are, what they're looking at, what they're into, and that can be manipulated. And yeah, I think it's worth looking into the extent to which TikTok and the Chinese government is
right.
responsible for this division we're seeing on college campuses now in the US.
And I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's worth looking into. I don't think I just don't get the feeling that there's a lot there, but I would not be surprised because we did see during the elections, Russia and China had a hand in trying to manipulate the outcomes. This could be a very powerful tool to do something in that regard. So I would not be surprised. Like you said, it is worth at least looking into.
Right, right. I certainly do get the feeling that they're trying to put their thumb on the scale in some way there.
Yeah.
Even
So
if it's a more generic objective of finding ways to keep us divided, maybe not again over this conflict specifically, but let's
right.
program the algorithm in ways that will get the U.S. citizens and residents fighting with each other and not focusing on broader issues.
Right. And then that was kind of the strategy that was cited that Russia was employing during the election, and their interference was to basically poke at our points of contention within the country
Yeah,
and
yeah,
kind of stoke those flames.
right, right,
So, and
right.
it's very easy to see what points can be poked in the United States and in our society to give some conflict.
Yeah, yeah. No,
So,
definitely. This is a very serious thing, right? The fact that so much of our life now is dictated by social media, right? And so it's so easy to manipulate that. It's a form of cyber warfare, really, right?
mm,
To take control of these algorithms. And if you're running social media companies, well, now you're basically in charge of generations of people's attention spans and what they're looking at,
right,
engaging with,
right,
seeing, right? The
right,
images that you're presenting to them, and you have that
right,
audience now. And yeah, that's a very powerful thing.
right. So, um, interesting. We have a comment in the chat, actually. I don't know if I would call maybe it's a troll comment, maybe not. Is a pro-Trump comment
Mm.
and says, "Buddy, if it were Trump supporters, you would be screaming for them to be expelled. Liberal hypocrisy at its finest, right there. Dude is a clown." I don't know if he's calling me a clown or you a clown. Um, I don't know, but let's look at
I don't
that.
know
If these were Trump supporters, I'm
what that
sorry.
refers to. They would be expelled from Colombia, you say?
If this were, I think what he's talking about is if it were Trump supporters that had taken over a building on a college campus in protest,
Uh,
we would be screaming for them to be expelled. And to his point, I think there would be a lot of people on the left who probably would be screaming for them to be expelled, to
but
be fair.
the poll that we just showed that even amongst more liberal-minded people, the majority said that these students should be expelled.
Right. Yeah. So I, I wonder if he's calling me a clown. I think he got the impression that I don't think they should be expelled.
Maybe he's called
Um,
Biden the clown. I don't know.
I don't know. He didn't clarify. I did put in the chat who would be um, screaming these things or who would be, who's the clown here. So we'll see if he does respond.
All right.
But um, it is a point of view to look at. If this wasn't a so-called liberal cause,
Mhm.
um, what would be the impression? Would people still be looking at it like, oh, they should be expelled, they shouldn't be expelled?
Yeah.
Type of
But
situation.
again, the prevailing view, even amongst liberals here, seems to be that if they're
Right,
breaking school policy, they should be expelled. And so
right,
they're not looking at the viewpoint being expressed in that regard.
right,
They're looking at the fact that they're breaking the rules of the school and breaking laws.
right,
And so I'm not exactly sure then what this person is insinuating, unless he's
right.
implying that the poll result was the opposite, that it actually
I
came out.
think they're talking specifically about one person. I'm getting the feeling he's talking about me, but I mean,
Maybe
it
he's talking
says
about the
the
comment.
last line was dude is a clown. So not talking about the poll results and everybody's response. I think they're talking
Okay.
about, yeah,
It could also be the commenter that you read, because you read some
that could be too.
comments to the poll. So maybe when you were reading one of the comments, they were responding to that.
Yeah, that could be too. And I'm sure, there are going to be a lot of people who feel that way. So
Yeah. And again, First Amendment right? We have a right to express
sure, absolutely.
views, but that does sometimes clash with other laws. So
Right. Right. And we covered we talked about this when not last week, was it last week or the week before, when Sheba was bringing up the point about alumni on campus, could they be arrested or whatnot? And we're like, listen, if they're breaking the rule, if the university says you have to leave and you don't leave, well, it doesn't matter if you're alumni or if you're a student, you're now in violation and there can be consequences regardless.
yeah.
So same situation here.
All right. Speaking of consequences, the mayor is offering $5,000 out of his own pocket to accompany another $5,000 as part of the reward for information leading to the arrest of a vandal or people who vandalized a World War I memorial in New York. Of course, what's noteworthy about this is that the mayor is offering the money out of his own pocket. And I'm sure some are going to say this is just a cynical PR stunt, right? A way to get
Mm.
himself in the paper and look good. Some people might think, hey, listen, he's putting his money where his mouth is, literally, right? So, what do we think about this? I think this is going to be our poll for next week.
Um, yeah, I think it's interesting that he's putting money out of his own pocket. Um, and why? Why would he pull money out of his own pocket, especially if there's already a reward? It's not like it doesn't sound like it's something that's being ignored. Why is he throwing extra on top of it?
Because he's
If it,
trying to look like the hero, right? The person who's actually stepping up and doing something about it. He's like, listen, I'm not just the mayor who's going to send the police after you. Like, I'm actually going to roll up my sleeves and get involved in this personally myself. I'm going to put a stake in this. And for some more context here, according to CBS, the statue was allegedly desecrated by pro-Palestinian demonstrators as hundreds marched from Hunter College to the Met Gala. An American
Mhm.
flag was also burned. So again, this is a very highly political, the same highly political, highly emotionally charged topic here.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I think I can see how people could look at it and just, just seems like it's a publicity stunt on the mayor's behalf, and not take it as a genuine act. But, it could be that he genuinely feels that there's a cause for bringing these people to justice. Now, this is a World War One memorial, which
Yeah.
I'm not quite seeing the connection.
Well, here you go on the screen.
It looks like they painted Gaza and Free Palestine on
Right.
it.
Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
one of the issues here, and this kind of leads into the Drink Champs interview, which we can touch on with Mayor Adams. He has been criticized by some on the left as being too pro-Israel and not sympathetic enough to the plight
Mm,
of the Palestinian people. And
mm.
this could be another way of him kind of flexing his muscle on that, because he's saying that there's an effort to turn his own base against him. He said some interesting things on that interview, but he definitely is poking his chest out here and saying, listen, I'll take the money out of my own pocket. We're going to catch the people who did this.
Right. Yeah. Um, I'm looking at the verbiage used here, or the language used here in one of the headings of the article in CBS News.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, NYPD actively investigating this heinous crime. Like,
Right.
is it really heinous? Like, someone painted Gaza and Free Palestine on a statue. Would we go as far as to say this is
Well,
heinous?
I think from their perspective, what makes it more heinous is not so much the message that was painted on there, but the fact that it was a desecration of a war memorial statue, right? There are some who are very sensitive and emotional about that particular aspect of it, right? Because the quote here was,
Yeah.
this comes from the NYPD, right? It says, vandalizing a memorial, a symbol of remembrance and honor, is not only an act of criminal mischief, but also a disrespect to the sacrifices of those who served our country. And so that
Right.
with why they describe it as heinous. If it was just, Gaza on some handball court, I don't think they'd be calling it heinous.
I think it's more of the sensationalism in media. Like, I can see that angle of not, disrespecting the people that served and died in here. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then also look at it as, like, you're talking about they just spray painted a word on there that can be easily wiped cleaned off. Like, is it heinous? Right? When I think heinous, I think something like disemboweling somebody, like something that's
Right,
really extreme.
right, right. No, I agree. Again, it's sensationalism. Yeah, it's highly charged rhetoric. This is what I was saying last time about genocide Joe, right? I mean,
Right.
uh, Joe Biden's committing genocide. I mean, you could argue about whether there is a genocide happening in the first place, but that's taking it to a different step by saying that the president of the U.S. is responsible for it. I mean, I do think we need to tone down a lot of the rhetoric that we hear.
So, Um,
Yeah.
but
All right,
this,
so
yeah,
we can put this to the people, see how people feel on this. And by the way, if people want to vote in these polls, where are they posted?
the polls are well, the videos will be on YouTube, um, and we do have a more extensive part of the poll that goes up on the Daily Coles site, under the Independent blog there.
So how do people
So
find that? If they log on to dailycoast.com, where do they go to get to the poll?
look for the user Independent.
Where do they look for that though? I'm not familiar with that site. For those
I think you could just go
now.
into the search bar.
Okay.
Yeah, go into the search bar and they should that would come up.
Can they search under Nuance or no?
Um, if you put Nuance, some of the old there sometimes their search thing doesn't do so well.
Okay. Maybe we should put links to these polls under the videos or something like that. So people can get, or on social media, somewhere where people can access them. If they're
Yeah.
not already on that site, but they want to go participate in the poll, so that when we read the numbers off on the show, it could be a more accurate representation of the audience.
Right. There's also like I said, it's also on YouTube, so they can go there and leave the comments. Um, if you're leaving your vote on the poll, leave it as a comment. Don't just use the thumbs up, thumbs
Right,
down
right.
button, which I think some people are doing. Um, Luckily, most of them seem to have more thumbs up than thumbs down, but I think people are using that as the voting
As a
thing. But
vote. Yeah,
that's
absolutely. Right. Yeah, yeah. Do you agree?
yeah.
Thumbs up,
It's
thumbs
like,
down.
no, that's not, no, no.
Yeah.
Leave your comment. Say something in the comments. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because you don't know. They could like the question, not like the question. They could be voting yes. Yeah, you can
right.
really discern what that means definitively.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, let's put this out there for this week coming. The poll question of the week is: how do you feel about Mayor Adams offering money out of his own pocket for the information leading to the arrest of a vandal? And I think we're going to ask if people think it's a cynical play by him, a PR stunt, or if it makes him a man of the people who puts his money where his mouth is.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Let's see how people feel in that regard. Um, yeah, it's a little bit of an unusual move, right? To put up your own money as the elected official, as the mayor. Um,
Mhm.
so, so speaking
Consistent,
of,
right? I was going to say consistent with the mayor's depiction of himself on Drink Champs, which is a hip hop podcast, really. But
right.
he went on there. Actually, he called himself the first hip hop mayor. Okay, um,
Okay, chill out there, buddy.
but interesting because we had done an episode on the mayor's interview on the Breakfast Club with Power 105.
Right.
And really, he was ambushed on that one by someone who wasn't even a part of the Breakfast Club, right? Some random lawyer woman was there just to give him a hard time and troll him, I guess. Very unusual and peculiar that one. This one, it actually began with Nori, the host of the show, Hip Hop MC himself, saying this is not going to be like Breakfast Club. We saw that one and you were ambushed, and this is not that. This is a friendlier
Oh,
audience.
he said that.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
He did say that, but he had Mice on there. Not usually part of Drink Champs, but
Right.
he was there as a special co-host because they acknowledged that my son was more engaged with New York City political issues than they were, and so
Right.
he actually was probably a welcome addition because it was clear that Nori in particular was not versed, by his own admission, not versed on these issues. So how are you going to have a 2 hour interview with the mayor of New York City about topics that are relevant to New York? It wasn't just a hip hop discussion. They talked a little bit about music in the beginning as kind of like an icebreaker, but the interview was largely about what he was doing as mayor. So you need people to be able to have that conversation with him who are following what's going on in New York. Aside from not being very political, Nori lives in Miami now, so he's really far removed from this.
Right. Although, yeah, if you don't have anyone there that can dialogue with someone at least similarly on that level or someone conscious of the issues, then it basically becomes just a propaganda, bullhorn for the mayor to say whatever he wants. Because if no one can check it or counter it, then you don't know what kind of information you're getting. So they definitely that needed someone, especially for 2 hours worth.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, I thought it was, at first when I saw the tweet, 'cause I remember sending you the tweet about it about a week or two ago, saying, "Wow, he's going to be on Drink Champs." It's like I had to confirm because it's like that just sounds like something that didn't make sense.
Mhm.
And then I had to confirm that who the tweet came from, that it seemed like it was legitimate. So
Right. And by the way, it's not without criticism. I've seen that. He's the mayor of New York City. It's obviously a very demanding job. And he's flying to Miami to be interviewed on this hip hop show for publicity, right? Obviously, it gets a lot of views. It's a very popular podcast. So, on the one hand, you could argue, well, it helps him get his message out even to New Yorkers. Okay, and
right,
that. But you see the other side, people saying, listen, you're flying around the country trying to be a celebrity. We have problems here.
right, right.
You know,
Um, so my first question about that, because I haven't seen any clips of it or anything like that, but my first question is, did he get faded? Did he smoke weed? Did he drink?
he didn't smoke. Um, I believe he had a drink at one point, but they played a drinking game where he wasn't taking shots. They asked a question of you had to pick between this or that, and if you're not going to make the choice, if you're going to say both or I'm not going to pick one or the other, everyone has to take a shot. But they excused him from that, so he wasn't taking the shots. He might have been
Mhm.
nursing a drink over the whole 2 hour period. Um,
Okay.
I'm not really sure on that. I know that he wasn't really drinking like a madman, like the like by the end of the 2 hour period, Nori couldn't even speak anymore. Right, he was just wasted.
So he didn't do like a Benzino where at one point he just started crying and all of that.
No, no, no. He held his composure. He did though play to the room. I mean, uh,
Right.
after a while, he started cursing pretty freely. When they actually were laughing at it at first because it sounded funny that the mayor was cursing. Then they got used to it. Right now, he's just all
Right.
right. We're doing this now. He's cursing with the rest of them. So that happened. He made a point to say that he doesn't sound differently in different rooms, which was kind of betrayed by the fact that he was cursing in that room and he usually doesn't curse in other rooms. So,
Right.
in fact, he's been criticized for that, right? When he was on a campaign trail, people said he talks a lot differently when he's, let's say with the white audience in Breezy Point versus with the black audience in South Jamaica. He's saying different, he's sounding different. He,
Yeah.
though, made a point on this interview to say, I sound the same no matter where I go. Uh,
Right. A
he
lot of
that.
that's, we would call that code switching, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of
Mm-hmm.
particularly black folks and minority folks have feel the need to do that in certain spaces, to do that code switching, to either come off as less aggressive or to be taken more seriously, to
Yeah.
combat stereotypes and whatnot. So yeah.
Yeah, but okay, is it code switching when it's the mayor cursing to drink champs versus speaking
But
what?
that's a good question. Like, is he normally like how he was with the cursing in his private life?
Well,
Or
I don't know about his
is he
private life,
code
but right, but in the public life, certainly not.
right? So is he code switching in private life,
Right.
in public life, where he's not cursing and he's, talking a certain way, or was he code switching when he went to Drink Champs to try to fit in
Hmm.
with what he perceived was that environment by doing all the cursing and stuff?
Right. And also, listen, there is a time and a place for everything. So I don't
Right.
want us to be portraying this like it's all a negative thing. I mean,
Right, right, sure.
talking with your buddies, you're going to be a lot more casual, probably.
Absolutely,
I'm in
absolutely.
court. I'm much more formal. May it please the court. The issue here, it's the environment that you're in, right? If
Yeah, you're not gonna be like the mayor's gonna be like, oh well, Scala, do you have any proof? And you're like, dog, listen.
right, right, yeah, yeah. What had happened was,
Right. So
but yeah, I mean, and again, if I'm doing a rap record, I'm going to be speaking a lot more casually, and so
right, right, right,
I
right.
describe
Yeah.
that as a form of code switching, also. But I think some of it is appropriate. You react according
Right.
to the environment that you're in. So we had a conversation here about wearing a suit in the Senate. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean that you're gonna be wearing a suit everywhere you go, but when you're in the U.S. Senate, you probably should look the part.
Right, right, right. So
So I just found that to be interesting. And on that same topic, by the way, they brought Howard Beach up, right, where I'm sitting
right.
right now, a local Queens neighborhood here. So the mayor was talking about how he stays the same. His rhetoric, his speech, what he's saying, everything is the same no matter where he goes. And Nori said, you can't speak the same way in Brownsville as you would in Howard Beach. And the mayor said, yes, I do. He said, I speak exactly the same way. And then here's a fact check. We're going to fact check this. He said, but
Uh-oh.
I won Howard Beach. He said the Howard Beach of today is not the Howard Beach as it was years ago. You know, it's much more diverse now. It's much more welcoming. We had a guy, remember Kyron, Kukul, I believe, Kyrul, I'm saying the name of Kyrul was on here, Kukan. And he was saying that years ago, his community didn't feel welcome coming into a place like Howard Beach, but he actually gave me a lot of the credit and others. He said in recent years, there have been much more welcoming voices and people kind of bridging those gaps. And it isn't the same as it used to be. And so the mayor made that same point. But the mayor said, here's where the fact check comes in. He said that he won Howard Beach in his election. Yes, he won it in the Democratic primary, which is what you need to do to become mayor of New York. You have to win the Democratic primary. He did not win it in the general election. The Republican candidate won Howard Beach in the general election. And so Nori and a lot of the audience, I think, was very surprised to hear that Eric Adams, Black Democratic mayor of New York City, won Howard Beach. Let's qualify that by saying he won it in the Democratic primary. And by the way, that itself might be notable, but we have to keep in mind he is a former cop. I mean, I think he won it because of his police background, because of his law and order type attitude, right? So when he goes on there and says, well, it's so different now, they even voted for me, I think we need to qualify that and say, okay, in the Democratic primary, and probably because you were perceived as a more conservative Democratic candidate.
Right, right. Yeah. So that's a good point. And I think that's why I'm curious how my son fared there, because he would be a voice to kind of do some either fact checking or debating on some of the claims that I'm sure that the mayor would have made, whereas Nori and his other co-hosts might not have been aware of, especially being in Miami and not in New York.
Right. So they were actually quiet for the majority of the interview. They just stopped talking altogether and let my son talk with Mayor Adams. And they were going back and forth on funding for programs and things like that. And the mayor was saying, we actually restored all this funding. He said when de Blasio was mayor and he was on his way out, he took COVID money and he was able to fund programs with that COVID money, but that was going to sunset and he knew he was going to leave. And so it wouldn't be his problem anymore. Then Adams came in and that COVID money was gone from the federal government. And so he needed to find ways to restore that funding for these local programs. But he was saying he did that, right? He's like, listen, all these things that you're saying I should do, I've been doing. And my son was saying, well, I'm out he's like, I go to the schools every day. I work on these after school programs. I help them with the curriculums. I try to get these programs for the kids going in the neighborhoods, community centers, all these things. He's like, everywhere I go, I'm told that there's no funding for it. All the funding was cut. All the programs were cut. And so they were arguing about whether there actually was funding there for those programs. I think it ended with an invitation where the mayor said, why don't you come sit down with me? We can look at the numbers. We can go over it and work together. And in that sense, it was much more collaborative than the Breakfast Club interview, which was done for the sake of being adversarial. I think that was the difference. Some of the same subjects came up, even when it came to policing, right? And my son saying we need to be putting more resources into mental health response as opposed to always a police response, especially if it's going to be a militarized response. You know, too many people are dying, all that kind of stuff. Talking about recently in Ozone Park, right? Remember we talked about the kid who was mentally ill and had a scissor and got shot by the cops? They were talking about that could have been avoided if people better trained in mental health issues could have responded to the scene instead of police officers with guns. So these same types of conversations came up, and actually the mayor made that acknowledgement. He said, I just want to say that this conversation we're having is really the same conversation that we're having at the Breakfast Club, but the style of it is different. The substance is the same right now, but you're approaching me with much more respect and not deference, but you're listening to me. He said the other, the person on the Breakfast Club wasn't trying to listen. She was just trying to get her pot shots in. He said, you were actually listening. If you say to me, this is what's happening, and I say, hey, brother, listen, it's actually like this. You don't have your facts right. You're engaging with that. And we're coming to a place where we can work together and collaborate on solutions. And it isn't just you trying to shoot me down. And so I myself, watching it, found my son to be much more credible in that he wasn't there just to tear the mayor down. He was expressing his concerns and, quite frankly, his outrage at points and his anger over certain issues. But he was there not for the purpose of ensuring the mayor loses the next primary, which I think is what the Breakfast Club person was there to do. He was there to ensure that the mayor starts responding to these concerns while he still is the mayor.
Mm,
And so it was a much more productive conversation. I think that goes back to what we've discussed on here many times as a general theme, that there's so much common ground to be had, but a lot of it just comes down to the way you approach these situations, the way you talk about it, right? The way you talk to someone that you may disagree with. We may have different views on an issue, but we can get to a productive place. We can agree upon solutions if we are willing to have that dialogue and not let it devolve into a shouting match. And that's what
right.
there. And that was actually very inspiring to see. Even as I disagree with some of the perspectives of my son, I think I agree with most of what he had to say. Some of it I thought was off base, but it didn't matter. Some of what the mayor said I thought was off as well. But they were trying to have a dialogue and come to a consensus on issues. All right, well, you're saying it's like this. I'm saying it's not quite the reality. Let's take a closer look at that. Let's sit down. Let's look at the books. Let's look at the numbers. I'll look at the programs. You take me to these schools where you're saying they're understaffed, and let's actually go in on this and work on solutions together, right? That's what you want to see, right? So removing the
Right.
substance of it from it, just the idea of you have people who maybe differed on certain topics, they could find that common ground and be willing to work together to improve people's lives. I mean, that's what public service is supposed to be about. It's about making improvements in people's lives. And I thought that that was genuine in the way that it was being approached, in that regard. It wasn't just a debate for the sake of having a debate. It was frustrated at certain things, but I'm willing to listen to you and I'm willing to work with you to come to a solution here.
Mm, mm. That sounds good. What were some of the topics that he got across, or that he was asked that they might have gone back and forth over that, you know, that stood out?
The big one was funding because my son, I guess, spends a lot of time working with schools and programs. He was talking about there's a big community center in Brooklyn, but we need more of that throughout the city. And
Mm,
again, it was about the money just isn't there. Every time he tries to get a program like that going or something in the schools, all the people who work at the schools, teachers and staff, tells him there's no money for it. And Adams was disagreeing with that, saying, "Brother, we funded all that. It's all funded. It's all funded." And he's like, "Well, that's not the reality I'm seeing in these schools." So, again, that was a matter of, well, let's actually look at what we're talking about. Let me go to the schools and talk to the people. Why don't you come look at the books, see what I did versus what the previous mayor did, actually see how that money is going into the pot, and look at it. He said, and don't just rely on what you're hearing, because sometimes people will repeat these talking points again from voices who are there to cut you down, right? So, like, for example, the woman who was on Breakfast Club, she would be
mm,
repeating these things that were blatantly not true, and maybe my son could hear some of that, right? Some of those messages, and think that the mayor isn't doing what he says he's doing. Maybe the
mm,
mayor has it a little twisted also, and thinks that his policies are having an effect that they're not. Maybe it's not getting out to the communities the way he thought that it was. And so there's some give and take there, I think, on both sides. When it came to policing, I think my son was pushing back on uh, Mayor Adams always seeming to stand with the police, but never the victims of police misconduct. And the mayor pushed back on that a little bit also, because my son was saying, "How come you didn't call the mother of the young man who was shot by the police?" He said, "I did call. I did call her." And my son said, "Well, we never hear that. We just hear you standing with the police, but never with the victims." He said, "Well, then," he's like, "Listen, the media will put whatever spin on it they want, and people who don't like me will just show me in the most negative light possible. But uh, you know, they're not covering the full context of what I actually said and what I did." And he was like, "Well, how come you didn't make that public?" He said, "I did make it public." So, again, it depends on the bubble that you're in, the feeds that you're subscribing to, what you're looking at. You may not be getting the full story of what's happening. People might just be showing you the parts that suit their narrative. I think some of that was happening here too.
right, right. Um, it sounds like it was a pretty good conversation.
Yeah.
I do look forward to um, checking it out or these getting some of these clips soon
Yeah,
because
check
I
it
can
out.
see that
It's
there's
worth
some
it.
already out there.
I'm
So
probably gonna watch it again to go into more depth. I watched it very late last night, but a lot of it did stick with me. You know, Israel and Gaza came up,
hmm,
and my son took issue with a video that he saw where I guess there were protesters, demonstrators, what have you, and they were demanding that the mayor calls on a ceasefire or a stop to the war. And the mayor, apparently in this video clip, just walked by one of the protesters and said, "Free the hostages." And my son said that that was insensitive because it came across like the mayor was saying that you can bomb as much as you want, kill as many babies as you want, until the hostages are freed. And
hmm,
and that's when my son was talking about that's all you see. And that's why these kids are protesting, because all they see are these videos and these images of babies being killed. I think maybe my son is spending too much time on TikTok himself, but that was his perspective. He was very sympathetic to that. And
hmm.
the mayor was saying, listen, I'm not going to say things exactly as they want me to say. He's like the same people putting those cameras in my face and demanding that I say it exactly like this are the same people going out saying that they want to kill Zionists and they hate the Jews. And, you know, they're the extremist people. He's like, I'm not going to kowtow to what they want and say things exactly as I want it. And he said, you know, you took it the way you took it. He's like, as the mayor, I've said myself that the war is not good, right? Babies dying is not good. We should put a stop to that. He said, but he said, I've also not limited my advocacy to that one issue in that one region. I've been saying that when it happens around the world. It's like there are other regimes where people are being killed, civilians are being killed, babies are being killed. We should come out against all of that, right? And then he also talked about October 7th. And he's like, that was a peace protest. That was a peace festival. They were singing for peace. And Hamas came in and killed people and talked about some of the very violent things that happened there. And he said, we sometimes lose sight of that, you know, when we're so one-sided on it. We're not looking at all of the peaceful people who were there and they were killed on October 7th, which is a very valid point, right? Because last week we were talking about, you know, it's not anti-Semitic to criticize the Israeli government. It's also not Islamophobic to criticize some of the atrocities committed by some of these regimes and by groups like Hamas.
Absolutely. Just that I give a side eye to that idea, like, oh, I also criticize these other ones. We should say that, we should criticize all of these things. It kind of gives an all lives matter type of energy, which is not really cool. We're talking about this specific thing here, like chill out with that.
Right,
But
but here's the thing, though. The people are also being very selective in what they're responding to and what they show their outrage over. I mean, again, you have to put this in perspective. Even with this particular issue, people are protesting the war by saying, "Well, we don't want babies to be killed. We don't want innocent people to be killed."
right, right.
They're not acknowledging the innocent people who were killed on October 7th. You know what I mean? They're saying, "Oh,
I
it's only about the Palestinian babies." I mean, so people are again, it's a lot of it is performative and a lot of it is ignorant.
I think some of it. I wouldn't say a lot of it. I don't think people, you know, I don't think the majority of people are for what happened on October 7th as far as people being innocents being killed. But we're seeing a disproportionate response at this point.
Right. Well, my
Um,
son made that same point. He's like, listen, that was horrible, and no one should be pro Hamas. My son said that. You know, Eric Adams said, well, there are people recently on the subway in New York City chanting Hamas is my hero. So extremists,
I would not doubt that there are some people who look
right,
at that view.
maybe don't represent the majority of those out
Right.
there, but you are seeing that. And again, it goes back to the poll question, right? The legitimate messages are being distorted and co-opted by these more extreme voices. So
Right.
that was all part of the discussion. Nori himself seemed shocked that that was. He said, "Where was that?" He said, "That was New York." He was like, "Wow," he couldn't believe it. But
Did
I
Nori
watched.
know what was actually going on? Like, or is he just drunk?
No, I mean he did seem upset by that, but again, he wasn't the host to interview the mayor about New York City issues
Right, right,
because
right.
they talked about the rat problem, right? And I think Nora actually brought that up. I think he said when he met with Juvenile in New Orleans at the height of his popularity, they were comparing New Orleans to New York, and Juvenile made the point that New York has too many rats, something like that. And the mayor was like, yeah, I've appointed a rat czar. We're doing all these things to reduce the rat population. He's saying, we're not going to put garbage in plastic bags anymore. They're going to be in sealed bins, and we're not going to attract the rats, and we're keeping the rats down. And then Nori went to the migrant crisis, and he said it was a ridiculous question. He said, and he called it the migrant crisis. I think he called it the migrate crisis. He said, and he said something like, does the maybe the migrate problem. It's something like, does the rat problem and the migrate problem coincide? That was his question. I'm like, what kind of question is that? Does the rat problem and the migrate problem coincide? And Adams gave kind of a ridiculous answer, I thought, because he said, that's actually a great question, and here's why. I mean, how is he going to tie these things together now? And so he starts talking about when he visited the encampments. When he first became mayor, he was at these homeless encampments when people had the tents up, and he didn't want New York to be like San Francisco. He's like, nah, brother, we gotta get you out of here. So he talked about what he saw. I'm not sure if he was suggesting that he saw rats there. He didn't specifically say that, but he said, I saw drug paraphernalia and people, in their own feces and vomit, and it was just disgusting and nasty. So maybe he was saying that if you have too many homeless people on the streets, that could increase the rat problem. I don't know if that was, he didn't say that specifically, right? Because he just kind of went off on this other thing about the homeless people and the migrants all of a sudden. But he was like, that's actually a great question. Does the rat problem coincide with the migrant? That's a great question. All right. Or he was out of his element. I don't think he really knew what was going on with any of these issues.
Well, at least he brought someone on that kind of, bringing my son on made sense, and he knew that he was out of his element in that regard. And even in the same vein, I'm glad on the Breakfast Club issue, they did at least attempt to bring someone on there as well, because, you've seen a lot of these political figures have been going on some of these shows lately.
Yeah. But I take issue with that. Charlemagne and Envy were well versed, and they actually asked very well informed questions. They're in New York. Envy asked more pricing. They really knew their stuff when it came to local New York issues.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, Charlemagne more. Envy was kind of quiet the whole thing.
Envy asked quite a few questions that showed he knew what was going on. Although I thought that Envy's take was, I'm going to ask the conservative side of it. I don't know if he himself is on the conservative side or if he was try and get the mayor's take to what he's hearing from that side or whatever. But it seemed like his questions mostly came from a conservative point of view, which I found interesting. But nonetheless, between him and Charlemagne, they both were informed on what was going on, what people were saying around the city.
All right. I wonder if we're going to see Mayor Adams on Math Hoffa's show next.
I wouldn't be surprised.
He's right there in New York.
Yeah,
he gets a big audience view count as well. These are people that are very connected to the New York issues. It might be a good outlet as well.
Right. One thing I do take issue with, in the beginning, they played a game of Nori's from Queens, my son's from the Bronx, Eric Adams, born in Queens, but claims Brooklyn. So they put 3 minutes on a timer, and they had to go around between the three of them and each name someone from their borough. It really should be the easiest thing in the world. Mayor Adams was the president of Brooklyn. He was the Brooklyn borough president before he became mayor. So how hard should it have been for Adams to name Brooklynites? And he really struggled with this one. I'm like,
Jay-Z.
That was his first one. And so here's the thing. Part of the confusion, I think, was, well, are we naming rappers? Because this is a hip-hop show. Are we naming just hip-hop people? Are we naming politicians? Nori was kind of vague about it. I think he even said we can name rappers and congressmen or something like that. But it was basically anyone from any notable person from the borough, and that really should have been hard because Nori named Nas, Nori named I think Cormega, Nori named 50 Cent, Nori named Tony Yayo. All right, so he's going with the Queen's rappers here. Then he named Donald Trump. He said Donald Trump. All right, so why can't Adams now name himself? Why can't he name any congressman from Brooklyn in history? Why can't he name any council member, anyone of note, any artist? I mean, there are a lot of people to choose from. He actually needed help. I don't know why he struggled so much with this. He named Jay-Z, and then he was kind of stumped. And I think people gave him Biggie. I think he came up with Little Kim on his own from the Biggie connection. Who else came up? MOP, but that was a suggestion. People were giving him names. He was like, yeah, that. MOP, yeah, okay. And I was like, ooh, you should kill this kid. You were the president of Brooklyn. You should have an easier time naming people from Brooklyn than anyone else.
Right. I mean, politicians even. I mean,
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you don't know rap, that's fine. Politicians even like what's,
right, right. But I think he wanted to name people who would be known by that audience. I mean, if
okay.
you start getting obscure, Nori's talking about people that we all know, and you know,
Listen, you can't
Adams
be
comes
the
out
hip
with
hop president
Adams
if
comes out with Ed Towns or something like that. It's like, all right, you're digging kind of deep into the well here.
you can't be the hip hop mayor if the first hip hop mayor if you're struggling to name anyone beyond Jay-Z coming out of Brooklyn.
That
Like,
is
come on.
true, right? And even rappers, right? You would think you'd be able to name a plethora of Brooklyn
Right.
rappers.
If you have to be fed Biggie for Brooklyn, you can't call yourself the first hip hop mayor. No, you can't.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. We're pulling your card, Mayor Adams.
So
I
yeah,
think
man,
he should stop by Nuance on his next one since he's doing the rounds on internet shows and
right,
podcasts and things.
right.
Yeah, hit us up.
Yeah, yeah.
I think we could give him a good conversation.
Oh, absolutely. And and we've done. I've been involved in forums with him, and I spoke at public meetings. We haven't done the podcasting with him yet, but he's certainly someone who can have that conversation with you.
Maybe we should send a request. We'll do that. We'll see.
All right.
Who knows? They can only say no.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was an
All right.
interesting interview. And I don't know. Some people criticize him going on there. I think it's probably a good look. It is New York City, so it's not like a random mayor. It's the mayor of the biggest and most important city, arguably in the world. So I think what he has to say about what he's been doing is relevant and worthwhile to get out there.
Right.
And also, it's a different world now, right? So this is media. Social media is media. So maybe back in the day, you see this even with celebrities going on to promote their latest movie or album or whatever. Right? It used to be you only go on shows, maybe the Tonight Show, or right,
Right.
but you do podcasts with a lot of viewers because that is how people are consuming media now.
Right. And that shows that validates a lot of this new media and shows, you can get an audience. People are drawing audiences everywhere and they can be effective. And we've seen that a lot with especially this political cycle where certain, some politicians are going on some of these shows. Breakfast Club is being, hit with non-traditional guests in that regard. Kennedy went on the Math Hoffa show, um, which was kind of an odd thing, but then at the same time,
Well, yeah, he was also
we
looking for
thought,
places that would have him because he was being
sure. But even in
about
the
the
last one, in the last election, wasn't didn't candidate Biden sit down with Cardi B?
Oh, well, he also went on the Breakfast Club, right?
Did he go on the Breakfast Club?
Well, he had an interview with Charlemagne, but that was the whole thing. If you don't vote for me,
It
you win.
was an interview with Charlemagne, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, but I think he also sat down with Cardi B as well.
wouldn't doubt it.
So even though they're not specific, she's not specifically media, but
Yeah,
to
social
try to
media.
engage
Yeah,
with these audiences, um, is something that's been growing as of late. So maybe who knows? Maybe we'll see Adams on, the Joe Budden podcast. That might be crazy. I don't. That would just be chaotic.
you see Joe Budden and Joe Biden on the same podcast.
Yeah, that would just be chaotic. I don't, that would just be crazy. They'd have to, again, probably bring somebody on.
Right.
They'd be kind of wild there. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Adams on Joe Rogan.
Yeah, I could see it.
Yeah. So,
All right.
all right, Adams, you've got a standing invitation. Let's get it on. Let's get it on. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, we haven't really reached out to elected officials on here. We've had a couple,
Right.
like the mayor elect of Poughkeepsie, and we had some, I think, there was a district leader and a couple people, but we never really made a point to bring on our elected officials yet. It's something that we can do, and I'm sure many of them will accept the invitation.
Yeah, and everyone seems to enjoy, have a good time and have that conversation. you
Yeah.
know, and it's good people to get informed or to hear these perspectives and be be challenged or have those discussions in a nuanced way. So it's good to get that information out there.
Right.
So we are, I think we've gone quite long today. You want to wrap it up with the bottom line?
Bottom line is, if you represent a borough, you should know who lives in that borough. For one.
Facts.
uh, no,
You call
listen.
yourself a hip hop mayor, you should know some hip
Yeah,
hop artists.
yeah. So it's interesting. We live in an interesting time. It's a new world, and we are seeing people utilize social media more. Right, the podcast is the new radio show, maybe the new TV show. That came up in Mayor Adams' interview on Drink Champs as well. They asked him if he preferred podcast or the radio. He said podcast, and so I commend people for adapting to the new world that we're in. But we also have to be mindful of the fact that traditional media, at least historically, maybe not going back to the beginning of the U.S., but going back in more recent times, before the times that we're in now, did have more balances and try and present things in a more objective way, not in a way that amplifies extreme voices or sensationalism. And so I think there is a danger that when you engage with this new media exclusively, you could fall into the traps of the algorithm and those pitfalls, right? And so I think as we move on, as we adapt to this new world, we should be mindful of the fact that there is a need to keep a balance. So when I say balance, I don't mean left versus right, Democrat versus Republican necessarily. What I'm talking about is being grounded and not giving in to the extreme and sensationalist devices and urges that are out there, right? But sticking to facts and trying to find common ground, and we're working with people.
Absolutely. I think that sounds really good. And for people who are interested in taking part in those conversations, they can join us on YouTube at Nuance Show, Instagram, and anywhere podcasts are, except for Google Podcasts, because apparently Google Podcasts is going away. I keep
Oh,
getting
okay.
emails from Google about that. So yeah, join us on there. Leave your comments, vote in the polls, and leave your comment to make your vote in the polls instead of just using the like button. Using the like button is great, but we'd also like to hear from you. So,
Yeah,
and then every Tuesday, live here at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Come in, join us, holler at us.
yeah. I'm actually looking on the Spotify page now. I don't know if it takes time of what's going on. The latest episode it's showing me is from February 20th. So is there a delay on these episodes now?
I'll have to look into that, see what's going
Yeah,
on.
yeah. So, all right. Well, as always, we've got work to do. Thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.